What's up, everybody? Ryan Thomas here, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Disclaimer here. Attention, everybody. I'm about to go into some political hoopla, okay? I'm about to go into stuff that I'm not going to pretend as if I am this big expert in, okay? I'm not going to go into this knowing who is who, what this congressman's name is, who this congresswoman is. I only know sports law, sports politics. I know the ins and outs of what is referred to as the Ali Act, due to much research that I have done on the Ali Act. So, this is going to be very interesting. This is going to be a little deviation from what I am used to, just riffing on sports topics. But in this instance, I'm going to be riffing on a political sports topic, which I rarely do. I don't enjoy doing it, but I'm going to because this is a necessary evil that I have to tackle. So, that being said, for years, at least a decade, if not more, 15 years, 2001, 2002, 2001, 16 years, the UFC was purchased by Zuffa, and since then, Zuffa LLC, which is ran by Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta, in association with Dana White, so to speak, has taken over the MMA landscape. They virtually created mixed martial arts and brought it to a new level. The mixed martial arts wasn't created by them, but the regulated mixed martial arts, in fact, was created by them. In large part due to the fact that for many years, this sport was not a sport. It had no rules. It was no holds barred. People were getting kicked in the head while they were down. People were getting punched in the groin. People were getting their eyes poked out. Hoist Gracie was ripping people's eyebrows off. Chemo Leopoldo specifically. And it was just a joke. United States Senator, former presidential candidate, highly respectable individual, John McCain, stated that it was human cockfighting. And when that stance was taken by John McCain, that allowed the ownership, I think they were SEG ownership, something like that. They decided to really go out and try to make something happen and try to sell it. Because at that point, with that label on the sport, that label on the brand of the Ultimate Fighting Championship at the time, not even known as the UFC, known as the Ultimate Fighting Championship, they believed that this proclamation by McCain was putting a black eye on the sport, and it was. And it was probably the best thing that ever happened to the sport of MMA because of the fact that this allowed the rush of these owners to say, hey, you know what, this is a sinking ship and we're not steering it in the right, we're not keeping this ship afloat. So we have to sell, we have to get out. So the Fertitta brothers, who are two, largely known casino owners in the city of Las Vegas, they decide to buy it for $2 million and go in on it with Dana White. Dana White runs it. He's the president of the operation, and it is now known as the UFC. In 2015, it was sold for $4.25 billion, the largest sports purchase of all time, purchased by WME-IMG. They've sold out Madison Square Garden not once but twice when the sport was banned in New York State for 20 years. They continuously sell out all around the world. And it is the largest combat sports organization on the planet. So it's kind of like a Mark Zuckerberg story. One drop, one shot, 1,000,000 to 1 shot. They take it, Hail Mary, and boom, they score a touchdown in the closing seconds to win the game. And the rest is history. That is kind of what happened with Zuffa and the UFC. So much has been done in terms of making this sport a sport when it was largely a spectacle, largely a just barbaric act. And we've come a long way. I mean, I actually have a job in which I write articles for the sport where there was no media market for the sport whatsoever in 1995, 1996, 1997, 1998, in the 1990s, nothing whatsoever. Even dating back 10 years ago, there was really no media push for the UFC. You know, it really kind of started in 2005, 2006 when The Ultimate Fighter had its big boom. That's what started the surge of the UFC. So, we're in 2017. As I stated, it's the largest combat sports organization in the world today. And the powers that be, the big names of the sport, the pioneers of the sport, Randy Couture, guys like Forrest Griffin, guys like Stephan Bonner, guys like Chuck Liddell, guys that paved the way for the sport, Rich Franklin, Hoist Gracie, Ken Shamrock, all these names are coming out of the woodwork and trying to enact the Ali Act, which Ali is obviously Muhammad Ali. He went to Congress and stated back in the day for boxing that there needs to be some sort of control from the promoter to the fighter. There needs to be some sort of protection for the fighter to get what he deserves in terms of his pay, in terms of his opportunity, in terms of just his all-out career. And the one drawback of the UFC being this successful is that there is no Fighters Association where, much like the NFL, the Major League Baseball, the NBA, just all the major sports leagues, the NHL, there is a Players Association where the players can come together and kind of rebel against the league if things are not going their way. And that has happened. We've seen the NFL go on strike. We've seen the collective bargaining agreement get reshaped and changed. We've seen referees be replaced with replacement referees, much to the dismay of the Monday Night Football crowd, if you remember the Seattle Seahawks Green Bay Packers game. We remember that. We remember the strike in the NHL in 2003, 2004. So we remember the strike in baseball. We remember the strike in NBA. There's been a lot of just throughout the years strikes and such. So the powers that be are sitting in front of the United States Congress, and they are stating why they need the Ali Act. Mark Ratner, who is the kind of VP, vice president, or head of the commission in Nevada, stated that he wants to get this together because the UFC is kind of picking and choosing who fighters should fight and such like that. And not so much that, it's just the fighters are not making what they are supposed to be making. They're making very little. They're making money that they were making back in 2006. And obviously, when the sale happened of WME IMG, that put a big bullseye on the UFC that, wow, they just sold for this much money. Now we might get paid. And guess what? That has not happened yet. Only the 1% to 2%, the big names like Conor McGregor, George St. Pierre, Ronda Rousey, Brock Lesnar, and John Jones, the top five, I should say, are the ones that are really getting paid. No matter who they fight, no matter when they fight, they are getting paid. And obviously, especially Conor McGregor. The congressman replies that the UFC is not a sport. They're the Don King of MMA. They are just complete garbage, and they do not deserve the Ali Act because of the fact that Dan Henderson fought Michael Bisping, and Dan Henderson was not a top 5 contender. They don't implement their ranking system. They don't implement this, that, or the other. Realistically, for the congressman to act as if he knows the pay-per-view business, as if he knows matchmaking, as if he knows combat sports, when really this guy has largely sat at a desk his entire life, typing away just false reports on certain stuff, not doing a damn thing, really. Most politicians don't really do anything. That is not a perception, that is a reality. The system is obviously flawed in every which way. It's old, and it's never going to change. So there's no point in really going into that side of things. But for him to say, well, Dan Henderson got a title shot, that was wrong. Dan Henderson's one of the greatest fighters in the sport that the sport has ever seen. It was his retirement fight. He was getting a title shot versus Bisping due to the fact that the remaining contenders for Bisping were not available. They were not in fight shape, and they were injured. So Bisping wanted a rematch versus Dan Henderson. The fans, myself included, wrote several articles begging for the UFC to make the fight, and the UFC, which is in the pay-per-view business, again, in the pay-per-view business, listened to their fans, which boxing does not do, and gave the fight that the people want to see. Now, are there obvious cases where things are skewed? There are several cases. To the congressman's second point, which I do agree with, he did state that the UFC has delegitimized the titles, which they have. There's no doubt about that. When you have Conor McGregor as the face of your organization, the biggest name in MMA, the most hyped up fighter in UFC history, and for good reason, he talks well, he looks good, he dresses well, he has the whole moniker, the whole persona, the whole bit. Again, being that they're in the pay-per-view business, they haven't given him he hasn't defended a title. We're in year 2 of him being a champion in 2 separate divisions, and still to this very minute, he has not defended a title. That delegitimizes the sport of MMA. But within that time, on one night, boxing and mixed martial arts came together on August 26th, which Floyd Mayweather fought Conor McGregor. You think after that fight was even talked about, demanded, scheduled, and had and finished, you would think that the Ali Act in the sport of MMA would become a reality. Because this is not about boxing. This is not about mixed martial arts. This is not about the UFC. This is not about Dana White. This is not about matchmaking or titles. This is about combat sports. And if people don't get that by now, I really don't know what to tell you, because boxing, it doesn't matter if you're a boxing fan. It doesn't matter if you're an MMA fan. At the end of the day, you're a combat sports fan or a combat sports writer, not an MMA writer or an MMA/boxing writer. I am a combat sports writer. You are a combat sports fan. I am a combat sports fan. So why is there a gray area? Why should the Ali Act only feature one sport, which in large part is corrupted, is now overinflated, is now overpaying fighters, which was said to not be the reality of the Ali Act? There was supposed to be a 50-50, a promotion and a fighter pay, not one or the other. Floyd Mayweather gamed the system, became his own promoter, found a way to work around the entire thing while enacting the Ali Act, and that could be an easy reason why, in that regard, he's the greatest businessman that boxing has ever seen and probably will ever see. So, in that regard, I respect him for that. He made a hell of a lot of money. Does he spend too much of it? 100%. Does he blow it? 100%. I could easily see Floyd fight again, and so many people think I'm crazy for saying that. You ask Floyd Million to do 36 minutes in a boxing ring for $300 million, and you would be hard-pressed to hear him say no to that answer, or to that question. So, the Ali Act, it's not about boxing, it's not about mixed martial arts. On the surface, the reasoning for that is just a joke. How many times have we seen ridiculous boxing matches get made? Floyd Mayweather largely came out of retirement due to the fact that he needed a big bang. He needed to go out with a big bang. Conor McGregor offered him that big bang in the sport of boxing from the sport of MMA. His last fight was against Andre Berto before he came back. Andre Berto had no business being in that fight with Floyd Mayweather, and they knew that. He wanted to go out with an easy win. He got the opportunity to do that against Berto, but it was a terrible Terrible pay-per-view. Sold 400,000 pay-per-views. Post 6 million Pacquiao pay-per-views. Congress should be ashamed of themselves. It's not about boxing. It's not about MMA. It's about combat sports and what's right for the athletes. I'm Ryan Thomas. That concludes the MMA Monday.